into our workshop. This will be our introduction to coding in Python. And so here will be our workshop outline for today. These are the things that we will be learning. This set of slides has already been shared to you via an email. So if you would like to follow along, feel free to open that up. First of all, I would actually like to ask everyone to open up idle and a new Python file if you haven't done so already. So these instructions should have also been sent out to you on how to install Python. Today we will be using idle as a very basic mode of editing a Python file. So if you search in your applications, you should be able to search up idle. And if you open that up, you will get this window, the Python shell. If you click File and then New File, you will be able to open up a window that looks like this, which you can then save to wherever you want on your computer. So as everyone is doing that, I will also give you an introduction to what exactly is Python. So first of all, Python is a coding language, and coding is writing in a language that we can use to talk to computers, just like English or Japanese or Spanish. It's something that we can use to tell computers to perform tasks that would otherwise be very difficult for humans to do. And Python is a very popular, or something that is English-like and intuitive for beginners to understand, and it emphasizes readability so you can understand it at a glance. It is easy and accessible, and that is why we have chosen it to give an introductory course on. So how exactly does a computer think, and why do we need a coding language in order to tell it what to do? For a computer, it doesn't process information the same way that humans does. It doesn't know a lot of context and doesn't have lived experience. So in order to ask it to perform a task, you must tell it in discrete, specific steps what you want it to do. And that's why a coding language is necessary. So now I'm going to go over a few definitions that will be important for today's workshop. The first of which is a variable. As I'm sure you have all encountered before in math courses or the like, it is a changeable number or text value that is assigned to a placeholder name. And it's much like X or Y in algebra. You can assign anything to it. For example, you can assign the variable X to the value 5, or 0 to the variable name min, etc. And the second definition that I would like to go through is a function. So this is a bit of code that performs a desired action. For example, the print function, which we will be seeing shortly, it uses the function to print out a variable. And now a comment. As you can see here, I already have a comment in my coding file. It is preceded by a hashtag or a pound sign, as some of you might know it as. And this is text that the computer ignores while reading the code. So it is for the benefit of you and other humans who might read your code. And this is very important for readability. And when you're coding something that is more complex, then things will get very complicated and hard to understand if you're not putting comments where you can and explaining to people what you're trying to do. Now, the last definition that I would want to go through is syntax. And essentially, this is the grammar of a language. Using the analogy of coding as a language, it would be like how you place commas or punctuation, capitalization, and spelling. So Python, something that I would like to tell you right now is that Python is case sensitive. So for example, a word with a word that is capitalized is not the same as a word that is lowercase. And as well, indents are also important, as you will definitely see later when we start to use some functions that involve indents, as well as colons and spacing. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to introduce the 4 data types that are used in Python. So the first data type is strings. These are text or characters. Essentially, you can understand it as a normal language sentences like I am speaking to you right now. And these are distinguished by quotes around the string. It is distinguished this way from actual code. Now, the second data type is integers, which are whole numbers. They can be positive, negative, or 0. And I'm sure you've all encountered this in your academic career, so I won't go into too much detail. Now, the next data type is real numbers, or also known as floating point numbers. And these are numbers with decimals. They can also be negative, positive, or 0. And yes, the important distinction is that they do have decimals that come after them, unlike integers. And the last one that is generally unique to coding and not seen much outside of it is Boolean. And in reality, it's very simple because there can only be 2 Boolean values, that is true and false. And yes, these are case sensitive, so be sure to capitalize the first letter when you're writing these out in your code. Okay, so let's start by assigning a variable and printing out our first thing. So here I am going to assign the variable name text to the string hello world, just to be cheesy. So now the program remembers this variable text as hello world, so it equates the two together. And if I use the print function, which I have mentioned before, and inside the brackets, I will put the variable that I want to be printed, which is text. If I run this, just click Run Module. It will ask me to save every time that I make a modification, so just click OK. And inside our shell, it will print out Hello World, which is, of course, what we know the program has already assigned to the variable text. So that is the print function, the most simple function that you can ever have. Cool. So since I've already told you about Boolean values, now I'm going to teach you a little bit about Boolean operators. Since if you have no coding experience, it's not likely that you'll know what these are. So there are 3 operators that you can use with a Boolean. There is and, or, and not. So first of all, I would like to talk about and. This returns true if both values on either side of the operator are true. So, for example, if you say true and false, this would evaluate out to false because there is a false on one side of this operator. However, if you write an expression that is true and true, it will evaluate out to true. So if we print this out, just to test it, if I say print true or false, and run this, it will print out true because that is how it evaluates such a expression. And the next Boolean operator that I would like to talk about is or. So this returns true if at least one value is true on either side of the operator. So false or false would evaluate to false, but true or false would evaluate to true. Note that this is different from how it evaluates from and. See, and gives false, whereas or gives true, because it only requires one thing to be true in order for the statement to be true. And the last one is not. So this essentially flips the original value, so it simply turns false into true and true into false. Now, an order of operations that's important to remember is that not precedes and which precedes or. This is basically like order of operations, BIDMAS, if you learned that before. It's like how we would do this in a proper manner. Okay. Now, arithmetic operators. So you can also do math in Python, as I'm sure comes to no surprise to any of you. You have the you have addition, which is simply represented by add, subtract, and the asterisk is the multiplication operator. 2 asterisks is the exponent operator, and 1 slash is division of real numbers, whereas 2 slashes is division of integers. So in division of integers, the only difference is that the decimals, if there are any, will be truncated. So basically, as you can see from this example, 7 divided by 3 would not give you 2, but it cuts off the decimal places afterwards, so it doesn't round up, it only rounds down. So that's how the computer would process this. Okay, and the last one is modulo. Essentially, it will give you the remainder of a division. So 7 divided by 3 will give you a remainder of 1, and that's, as you can see, that's what it gives you. So, as you can see, I can put this into Python and show you guys an example of this in action, as well as show you how the arithmetic operators work in order. So keep in mind that BidMath does operate here. So everything goes in order from brackets then to exponents, as I'm sure you've all learned before in your academic career. Say print something like 2 by 3 to the power of 5 plus 1. Now, if I run this, of course, it will evaluate the number given by 3 to the power of 5 first, and that's a very large number. Then you can see if 2 is divided by that, it will give us a very small number, which is probably less than 1, right? So if you add 1 to that, it will be 1 point something 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 followed by a bunch of decimal places. However, since I have 2 slashes here, this is done by integer division. So it only gives us 0, and then after you add 1 to 0, it will give us 1 without any decimal places following after it. Okay, now let's move on to relational operators. These are very simple. It's comparison of 2 values. So this is less than, this is greater than, this is less than or equal to, which is the less than sign followed by an equal to sign, and that is greater than or equal to. The exclamation followed by an equal sign is not equal to, and the double equal sign is equal to. And this is not to be confused with the single equal sign, because as I've already shown you in my previous examples, this equal sign is used to assign a variable to a certain value. As you can see here, I've used the equal to sign to assign the variable text to the string hello world. Okay, so here I will give you an example of our second function that we're going to learn, which is the input function. The input function takes something from the user and uses it inside the program. So essentially, you can prompt your user for something and then use that in whatever you want. So first of all, I'm going to assign the variable num1 to the input that the user gives to the prompt. Enter a number. And now I'm going to assign the variable named num2 to the input that the user gives to the prompt. Enter another number. And now I'm going to follow that up with the print function, and I want to print the result of num1 plus num2. Okay, so now I'm going to run this. I'm going to enter a number, let's say 5, and well, I entered 4 and then 3. So before I run this function, can anyone tell me what they predict the program will give us when I press enter?
7.
You think it will give us 7. Okay, well, let's test that out, shall we? Okay, so it doesn't give us 7, which we might expect. It gives us 43, which is essentially just mashing the two values that have entered together. So, and you might be wondering why it doesn't give us the intuitive answer. Well, it's because the input function that is uh, given in Python, the built-in input function, automatically converts whatever you input into a string, which is, as I've explained, the value type that represents like language and like sentences and characters, things like that. So if you try to add those, add two strings, it doesn't add them like numbers, it adds them by mashing them together. However, we can fix this and give us the actual value that we want by using the integer function, which looks like this. So it goes int, and then inside the brackets, you will have whatever you want to convert into an integer, like this. And now if we run this again with the newly fixed code, so 4 and then 3, there we go. Now we get the value that we expect, which is 7. So the int function is not unique. You can also use the float function, which looks like this, or the string function, which looks like this, to convert whatever is inside the brackets into a float or a string, respectively. So now I'm going to comment everything out. Okay, so moving on to our next thing. We are going to talk about lists. So lists are, as the name implies, it's a list of items, and these items can be any kind. However, these are indicated by the square brackets around your list, and they can be updated as well. And as you will see in future examples, updating variables is often very useful. So as you can see on the slide, the format of a list is given by the variable name, which is whatever you want to name your list, and then you assign it to a list followed by the square brackets, and then the items in your list separated by commas. So I'm just going to give the example of dairy. This is my list, and I will put things in it such as milk, yogurt, and butter. And those are the 3 items that I will have in my list. Okay. So now moving on to an application of how we can use this, we are going to talk about the len, index, and range function. So basically, the index function gives the position of a character or an object in a string or a list, depending. And len gives the length of a string or a list. So in order to show you this in action, let's assign the variable word to the word medicine. Now I will use the print function to print out the len, or the length of the word. Close the parenthesis, and now I will print out the word, and I will use the square brackets to retrieve the index, which is at position 2 of the word. So as you can see, this is how you use the index function. Unlike the ones that we've learned before, it's not like writing out index and putting something in parenthesis. It's following the variable that you want the index from with square brackets, and inside those square brackets, you put the position of the index that you want. So let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so our result gives us 8 and D. So the important thing to note here is that we count numbers starting at 1, but a computer counts numbers starting at 0. First of all, if you see the number of letters in medicine, there are 8 letters, so the function len will give you 8. However, if you look at index, it will start counting at 0. So it will assign 0 to the first letter in the string, like as you can see here. And then E is 1, and then D, which is our example, is at position 2. So that is why you have to be mindful of this and subtract 1 where you're using something that requires you to do so. Yes, okay. So now I'm going to talk about the range function. So the range function, as its name implies, provides a range in the form of the range function first, and then the parameters inside of the parenthesis go start, stop, and then step, which is a Gizmo mnemonic that you can use. So, for example, if I put, okay, so if I put the first number in here as 0, then the range will start at 0, and then go until I tell it to stop, and then go by the step size that I tell it to. Soon you will see this in an example, which will hopefully clarify it. Okay, so, cool. Okay, now we are going to talk about a conditional statement, which in reality is just one function that I'm going to teach you about, which is the if function. So essentially, the if function allows you to select for conditions under which the statements following it will run. And then the format in which you would use it is the if statement here, followed by the variable, and then a comparator which compares the two variables, and then another variable which you can choose whatever you want. Okay, and elif stands for else if, and it allows you to select for even more conditions if isn't enough for you. And else should come at the very end of all your if or elif statements, and it will run the statements underneath else if all of the other conditions under if or elif are not met. So I will now give you an example that will hopefully clarify this. So comment everything out first. Okay. I'm going to write the statement if. I'm going to first assign the variable named a to the integer called integer 5, and I will assign the variable b to the integer 2. Now I'm going to use the if conditional statement to say if a modulo b is equal to 0. Now I'll follow this by a colon because that is part of the syntax of using the if statement. And note that there is an indent here followed after the if statement, which tells the computer that whatever is indented in this much is what you will what it will process or what it will run if the if statement is met. I will tell it to print a is divisible by b. And I will follow it with else. If the first condition is not met, then it will print out a is not divisible by b. Okay, so if I run this, it will give me the result a is not divisible by b, as we can predict from seeing that 5 is indeed not divisible by 2. However, if we change it to something that is actually divisible, for example 6, which is an even number, then the program will print out a is divisible by b because now this condition has been met. Because a modulo b, since there is no remainder because it's divisible, will be equal to 0, so the program will print out a is divisible by b. Okay, so now I'm going to give you all an exercise to put into action what we have learned so far. So basically, the goal of this exercise is that you are going to write a program which prompts the user for a number that they enter. And then you compare the input that the user enters to a designated number that you have already selected. And then, for example, if you have assigned your number to be 5, and then the user inputs 4, then your program will tell the user that their guess is too low. And if they enter a value that is higher, for example, 10, then your program will tell the user that their guess is too high. And lastly, if they guess the correct value, then your program will tell them that their guess is correct. So I am going to give everyone a couple minutes to work on this, and then when we come back, I will show you the solution. So here is a list of the functions that you might need to use. And I would like to remind people to don't forget to assign variables because it makes life easier. And I will be here to answer any questions that you have. So please go ahead and begin.
Okay, so someone in the chat says, could you explain the objective of the code that we are writing again? I didn't understand it the first time.
Okay, so the objective of this code is to take an input from the user that is a number, and you compare the number that the user enters to something that you have already selected. So for example, if you pick the number 10, and then you will compare whatever the user entered to the number 10. If they enter, for example, 5, 5 is less than 10, so your program will tell them that their guess is too low. If they enter, for example, 11, 11 is greater than 10, so their answer will be, the guess will be too high. Yes, does that answer your question?
Yep, looks good.
Sorry, I can't see the chat since I'm screen sharing, so I will have to depend on Sarah and Shane to relay the information to me. Okay, so it seems like our time is up, and I have given you all 3 minutes to do this, so hopefully you will have attempted to accomplish this. Now, I am going to show you guys how this is actually done, and it's pretty simple, actually. It only requires a few lines of code. First of all, I will assign the variable named num to the value 10, which is the example that I've been using. This is my designated number. Now, I will assign the variable named guess to the input that, actually, the integer version of the input that the user enters to the prompt of enter a guess, colon, space, for them to enter something, and then close my parenthesis. Now, I am going to use the if conditional statement, which we've just learned about, to compare the variable guess to the value at variable num. So if the guess is greater than num, then my program will print out your guess is too high. However, now to account for the other possibilities, I am going to use the elif function, which stands for else if, as I've said before, to compare the value at guess to num again, but this time is comparing if guess is smaller than num. And if that is true, my program will print out your guess is too low. Close my parenthesis as always. And for the last possibility, if they actually guess correctly, I'm going to tell my program to print out your guess is correct. Okay, so now I'm going to run this so you can see how it works in action. So I am going to, first of all, enter a guess that's too low. For example, 6. Now the program will print out your guess is too low. Because it compares 6 to 10 and sees that it's too low, if the condition is true, that's what it prints out. Now I am going to enter something that's too high, like 34, and it will print out that my guess is too high. And the last possibility, if it actually is the correct value, it will print out your guess is correct. So I hope everyone had liked that exercise, and it was a stimulating thing to do. Okay.
Sorry,
So,
can I ask you a question?
Yes, go ahead.
So for assigning the num equals 10, like, is that just to like optimize the code, or why couldn't we just put guess equals 10, or if guess is greater than 10? Like, why do we have to assign it to a variable?
Well, you could actually replace each instance of num here with 10, but that would be a little complicated to do because the program will remember the value of num for you, and if you miss it once or twice or something, then it will be more convenient for you to write it, if that makes sense.
Can I add in that?
Sure, go ahead.
You can easily just put in the number itself, but if you're using num multiple times throughout your program, then if you ever need to change num, then all you have to do is change it the first time it's assigned. Otherwise, you'd have to change it at every single step along the way. So it's a way of saving a lot of headache and a lot of work from yourself to assign a value to a variable first in case you ever need to reuse it.
Yes, that's put very well. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. Now, we are going to move on to the real meat and potatoes of coding, which is control structures. So first of all, I am going to teach you about for loops. A for loop traverses a given range, and indentations are very important. As you can see, following the colon at the end of the for statement, there is an indent, and then the following parts are what is printed out, or what is the actions that are performed if you run it. So control loops are basically ways that you can repeat a set of actions a number of times or for a specific condition. So it makes it more convenient for you to repeat something, as you will often have to do in coding. Okay, so I am going to show you a very simple example of the for loop in action. First of all, I'm going to write for. This is followed by the variable I, which is a temporary variable assigned to whatever is the current position of the for loop. This will hopefully make more sense as I show you this example. Then this is followed by in, and then you give the range that the for loop runs for. Like the range function, as I mentioned before, it has a given range and the parameters are start, stop, and step. So I want my range function to start at the value 0 and then go to the value 10. I am not going to specify step because step is automatically 1 if you do not specify it, and you do not have to specify it every single time. And now I'm going to press enter and then tell my program to print the string x for every number in range 0 to 10. Okay, so as we can see, we have printed out a series of x's, and if we count them, there are exactly 10 x's here. So why does that happen? Because there are 10 values in the range from 0 to 10. It starts counting at 0, and then it stops before the last value because that's how the range function works, as I've mentioned previously. So from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, there are 10 values in total. So that's how many x's are printed. Okay, so I'm going to give you another, perhaps more complicated example so that you can see the full potential of the for function, for loop. I'm going to assign the variable named string to the input that the user gives to the prompt enter a string. Okay, now I'm going to assign the variable named char to the input that the user gives to enter a character from that string. Now I'm going to use the for loop. I'm going to say for I in range of using len, so which gives us the length of the variable in the string. I am going to put a colon here, and then if this condition is met, the string index I is equal to the variable char, then my program will print out the index of that character is, comma, and then I in the string. Okay, so essentially the purpose of this series of code is to give the user the index of a character that they input that is from a string. So the program will retrieve the index for them and search for it within the string. So if I run this, you should be able to better understand exactly what I mean. For example, I'm going to enter the string aims. And now I'm going to enter a character from that string, for example, S. Now, if I run this, the program will give me the index of the character is 3 in the string. As I mentioned before, index starts counting at 0. So A is index 0, I is index 1, M is index 2.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And S is at index 3. So that is exactly what it prints out. And then the next S is at index 4. Okay.
Mm.
I think somebody's mic is unmuted. Could you all please check and see if your mics are muted?
Mama, you also have a little bit green. The mom got it. Do you want a piece?
Yeah, you can use all of them because we don't finish. Yeah. We need to finish the map.
The greens off. Yeah, I will cut it.
So could you please make sure your microphones are muted?
Okay, silence? Okay, cool. So basically, that is exactly what this function does. It searches for the character S within this string and gives us the positions of those characters. So as you can see here, inside the range of the length string, so essentially what this will do is that it will tell the program to search the entire length of whatever string is. So it will search the entirety of aims. And for everything that it comes across, every character that is there, it will compare it to the character that the user inputs. And if it is actually equal, if it is the same, then it will print out the index of the character is blank in the string. Okay, so does anyone have any questions or is confused about that example? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Now we are going to learn.
Hi.
Yes, hello.
I have a question about this. So if we if in that for loop, if we add an else statement and say that, for example, if the string that we give for that variable char is not in the string, then we print something else. But then when you try to run that, that prints out I think 10 times, or prints out for however many times however many letters there are in the string. I don't know if that makes sense.
So why don't we test that out, right? So you're saying that if we enter a string, for example, aims, and then we enter a character that's not actually in that string, like B, and then we press enter, well, it actually won't print out an infinite number of things. It will not run because it compares B to every character inside of aims, but this if statement does not ever become true because B is not found anywhere within the string. So since the if statement is never true, it will not execute this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I was just trying to explore a little bit with if you added like an else statement below that.
And so like if a character isn't found in that string, then you will print out something else. For example, this character is not found within the string.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Yes, but that is a little more difficult to execute than what you're thinking, but feel free to explore a little bit of that, just fiddle around with it. But since we are crunched on time, we will have to move on to while loops. So a while loop, like its name sort of implies, it executes while a condition is true. So the condition can also be updated to become false after a certain number of iterations so that you can control how many times it runs. To give a simple example, I will use the while statement here. While this, I will first assign the variable z to 1, and then I will say while z is less than 5, my program will print out the string O. And then if z is updated each time to equal z plus 1, then eventually this while statement will become true because z continues to increase, and then eventually it will become greater than 5 or equal to it. Okay, so as you can see here, it prints out 4 O's because this loop runs 4 times before it stops running, and that's because while is true 4 times before it becomes false. So the first time, z is equal to 1, so z is less than 5, which means that the following expressions will run, so it will print out an O, but then z is updated to equal 2, but 2 is still less than 5, so it runs again. Then afterwards, 2 is updated to 3, and it's still less than 5, so it prints out another O. And then z becomes 4, prints out another O, and finally, z becomes 5. So now z is no longer less than 5, so it will stop printing out the O's. Okay. So now we'll move on to another exercise to put what you've learned into action. So the goal of this exercise is to have a program that prints out a square made out of stars in the size of the user's choosing. So if your user chooses the number 3, for example, your program should print out a square that looks something like this. This has a side length of, and this has a side length of 3. It will print out a square that looks like that. Okay, The functions that you will use are listed in the slides as well. So I will give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll come back to it. And I will also be here to answer any questions. So if you have questions about how to do this, you can ask me. Okay, one more minute left. Okay, time's up. I hope you have all attempted to try to do this. Does anyone have any suggestions or comments on how they tried to do this? For example, maybe give me a function that you used or a line of code. I'll take that as a no. So now I'm going to show you how I would go about solving this problem. First of all, I'm going to assign the variable name size to the integer value that the user inputs to the prompt, enter a size. And then I am going to use the for loop to repeat a set of actions a certain number of times. So for I in range size, I am going to tell my program to print out this star, followed by a space to make it look prettier. And then I'm going to multiply it by the size. Okay, so what this essentially does is that this will probably give us a line that is made out of stars that's the size that the user desires. So if, for the example, the user enters 3, like we said before, this input will take that number 3, and then this will convert it to 3, and then this will make sure that the program remembers 3 means size. Now, using this for loop, for every number within the range given by size. So since size is the only parameter given in this, the range function will automatically count starting from 0 up to the last value before size. So it will give us the same amount of values as are in size. So if it's 3, then it will give us 3. So for 3 times, it will print out this row. To run this, let's enter, for example, a 5 as our size. It will print out this square with a side length of 5 and also a height of 5. So hopefully everyone understands how exactly this program runs and why it does what it does. Okay, so here's a solution. And now we are going to move on to our next topic, which is functions. So functions are essentially a way to store a set of code so that you don't have to repeat it every time. Within the function, you can write all of your statements. For example, I can make a function that prints out this square, and I can just name it the square function or something like that. So the format of writing a function is that you first write def, and then followed by your function name, whatever you want to name your function. Then followed by the parameters, which are separated by commas. So these are things that essentially like inputs, basically, that you will take in order to run this function. And these are defined by the user or whatever, or like the function call when you try to call the function. And one last definition that I want to touch on is return. So if you write return and then something coming after it, it will return whatever is behind it to the main program. So hopefully this will become clear as we use it in an example. Okay, so I am going to define a function name as search. That's what I'm going to call my function. And the parameters are going to be a list and an item, like this. Now, now I put a colon, and then underneath the indent is the statements that will be within my function, which is what will occur if the function is run. So I'm going to use the for loop to repeat something for the same number of times that there are values in a range that is given by the length of a list. So for the number of things that are in a list, I will run this loop. So I will use the conditional statement if to compare if the index at a list, that is I, is equal to the item, then I will return I. But if not, then I will say return false. Okay, so essentially what this does is that it searches a list for an item, and when it finds that item, it will give back the position of that item as in the index. And you can't use a function without a function call, so in order to call that function, I will tell the program to print out search, which is the function name, and then I give it the parameters that I want to put into here. So I want a list to be our list called dairy, and I want the item that we want to search for to be meat, like this. And I have to make sure that dairy is not commented anymore. Okay, and so we're going to search this list for meat. And if I run it, I forgot to put in here. So it's I in range whatever. So this is perhaps a teaching moment. Please pay attention to syntax. Remember to close all of your brackets. Remember to put all your colons where they're supposed to be. And don't forget to put in. Okay, so our function prints out false. So why does it do that? It's because once it searches the list dairy, it doesn't find meat within it. So this is not true, even though it's gone through the entire list. So that's why it will return false. But if we search for something that's actually in the list, for example, milk, and I run this module again, it will give us 0 because that is the position of milk within this list. If you remember, milk was the first item, and as I've said before, the computers start counting at 0, so the first item is actually the 0th item. So that is why it gives us the index as 0. And if we test it on something else, like butter, it will give us 2 because the position of butter in this list is 2 rather than 0. So does everyone understand what I've done so far? Okay, I'm going to take that as no questions. So I am going to briefly talk about libraries first. So one advantage of Python as a coding language is that it has a large user base. It's a very common language that everyone uses for a wide variety of applications. So that means that it has libraries, which are lots of functions organized into collections. So you can download these libraries and use them in your own code with the import function. But I will not go over it too much because we are running out of time very rapidly. So moving on to the summary. Today we covered all of these topics. We have talked about variables and data types. Assigning variables means that we just name a certain variable and like give it a name such as X or word or whatever you want to call it. Usually these variable names are meaningful so that it's easier for you to remember exactly what they represent. As well, as Shane mentioned before, it's easier to like replace variables or modify them if you've given them a variable name, rather than directly using the number or value in your code. And we've also covered data types, the 4 types of data: strings, Boolean, integers, and real numbers. And we've also covered arithmetic, Boolean, and relational operators. Arithmetic, as you've probably all seen, it's just the regular operators like division, addition, subtraction, etc. Boolean are not, and or, and they are things that modify either true or false to become the result of that expression. And relational operators compares two variables on either side of them. You can compare both the numbers and see which one is larger, or you can also compare strings. So if you write one string is equal to another string and the 2 strings are not the same, then it will print out false. So actually, I can give you an example of this. For example, I will print, let's give the string moo, because I'm thinking of dairy right now, is equal to cow. And now we're comparing these 2 strings. If I run this module, you can see that it prints out false because it sees that these 2 strings are not the same. So yeah, relational operators are not limited to just numbers. So yeah, we've also learned conditional statements, control loops, and all these other fun stuff. Now we've come to the end of our time, so I'm happy that you have all joined us, and hopefully you've learned something valuable from this. Thank you. Yay. Okay. I don't have many closing statements, so feel free to leave or stay if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you learned something. And thank you, Chun, for such a good workshop.
Hooray!
And I think a couple of us are going to stay after just in case anyone wants to go over any code or has any questions.
Yep.
Hello.
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 I have a question. Like, what's the best way to get like familiar with code and like start practicing? Because this stuff's like entirely new to me, so I was a little lost today. But is there like any practice I can do or something I can look into to get better at it?
That's a very good question. And yes, it's true that coding requires you to practice a lot before you become familiar with it. It's not just a theoretical thing that you can learn once and immediately become good at. So for you to practice code, I would suggest online resources because there's many people on YouTube that explain things way better than I do. And there's many other funky little exercises to be found, like the one that we did where I printed out this like row of X's or the star, square, etc. So you can look online for those. As well, this workshop will be recorded and the slides have already been sent out, so you can look over that if you like.
Maybe we could stop recording now just in case other people want to say questions.